On the Fancast at 4 podcast, a creative is chosen along with two separate yet equally important ideas: the cast with whom they would work and the movie or TV show they would make. These are those pitches. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Welcome, Fantastic Friends, to the new episode of the Fancast at 4 podcast, the number one Fantastic Four fancasting podcast on the internet.
Presumably.
I'd say circumstantially. I'm Dan Bettenhausen.
And I'm Jack Mayer.
And we are your hosts as we venture into the what-ifs of Marvel's first family, who will be appearing in Phase 6 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
With Matt Shakman set to direct the MCU's Fantastic Four film, we still can explore what it would be like if a different creative was in charge and who might they cast.
This week, we are excited to have a returning guest, John Lestrina, joining us. John can previously be heard on our Justin Lin and Jim Henson episodes. John, thanks for joining us, and please tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself.
First of all, hi, Dan.
Hi, John.
Hello, Jack.
Greetings, John.
Thank you for inviting me back for the third time. Wow, I feel so privileged, honored, excited, happy, and fantastic.
That's a lot of adjectives.
Thank you.
More than I can say.
You know, Jack, what they say, when you get older, you'll learn a few more.
Yeah,
Presumably.
exactly. I'd say probably.
Without spoiling who we're talking about, what made you want to come back for a third time?
Well, it's a very good question. I like talking about things sometimes, and this seemed like a very fantastic topic that we selected and talked about. So I figured, hey, why not? Let's give it a shot.
It could be fantastic.
It could be, perhaps.
We're very much giving away what this episode is right now.
With John introduced, let's take an opportunity to talk about the person we will be discussing. We are shifting gears this week away from film and into television and discussing an Emmy award-winning American television producer who oversees 3 popular network television franchises and their multiple spin-offs. He is also an inductee in the Television Academy Hall of Fame.
This week, we are featuring Dick Wolf. John and Jack, what else comes to mind for you when you think about producer Dick Wolf?
CNN.
Yeah, I mean, he's a legendary news person who has been in quite a number of films as well.
Wait.
A journalist for the ages. He was
gentlemen,
great in Mission Impossible Fallout.
Gentlemen.
Dan, sorry. Jack and I are talking. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
sorry,
but hey. I think you've got things mixed up. I think you're thinking of Wolf Blitzer.
What if Wolf Blitzer produced a Fantastic Four or a Fantastic Four?
No, Dick Wolf. We're talking about Dick Wolf, not Wolf Blitzer.
That's kind of mean to call someone a dick, Dan.
I didn't name him.
I have it right here. Hey, John, would you like to be on a dick?
I'm gonna have to rewrite my pitch real quick.
Yeah, sorry. Can you just give me like 20 minutes and I'll just
Yeah. Hold on. We'll go away. But trust me, when we get back, it's gonna be fantastic.
Wolf.
Okay, we're back.
Fantastic pitch for next time. Okay.
All right. Cool.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'm good to go.
All right, we're good to go? Yeah.
Well, instead of our normal segment for Fantastic Films, we wanted to take this opportunity to discuss Dick Wolf's trio of franchises and their subsequent spin-offs. I will admit 2 of these 3 that we're going to talk about, I have maybe seen 1 episode total. So that's why we have our expert John Lestrina in here to talk about not Wolf Blitzer, but Dick Wolf shows. And the first one I think we're going to discuss is the Chicago franchise, which includes Chicago Fire, PD, Med, and the now canceled Chicago Justice. John, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about Dick Wolf's Chicago franchise.
Yeah, so instead of New York City, we're in Chicago. very exciting. Admittedly, yes, the Chicago Justice I don't know much about because it's canceled, and so yeah, the Chicago shows are the ones I know the least about because I haven't watched them all regularly. I have watched some Chicago PD, which is pretty cool. It's got some interesting characters, like the main guy, the sergeant. He has that voice that I would really like to do, but I don't want to. I think his name is Jason Beggy. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. It's weird spelling, but he's got a really good voice, really gruff sort of voice. Sophia Bush, I liked on it too. She went for a little bit and then she left the show. But it's like a more it's cop show, traditional cop show kind of thing. And also too features Casey Jones actor Elias Koteas in it as well. And I do love me some Casey Jones. And there's it's been on like I just realized for 10 seasons,
Oh wow.
and it seems like wild and crazy. But again, they've also done a lot of crossovers too with Law and Order as well. So I've seen those characters like the ones on Chicago Med and Chicago Fire showing up on those Law and Order crossovers. But again, it's not the one I regularly know. But from what I've seen, it's fine. At least the Chicago PD, it's fine. I know my parents watch a bunch of reruns a lot, and they seem to like it and enjoy it.
You bring up a good point with the crossovers, and I think that's one of the reasons I think Dick Wolf is actually an interesting prospect for Marvel property, because I wouldn't say by any means he invented like the inner franchise crossover, but you see that in the MCU now, all the crossover among how the whole world is interconnected, and we've seen that with like the Law and Order shows that have been long running before the MCU, all the
The
way
fact that like
through. Yeah.
the fact that episodes are from a certain show, but will feature characters from other shows, and the next episode will be a continuation of that story, just under a different title.
Right, right. But yeah, so fascinating. And I think his kind of purview, his kind of style surprisingly fits in superhero world, in the MCU, and this kind of superhero film landscape that we see. What about the FBI franchise? This is one I'm even less familiar with compared to the Chicago
Hold on, I
shows.
actually do have something to say about the
Oh,
Chicago franchise. I think that the Bears have a real shot this
hell
next NFL
yeah.
season.
Oh, what if they
Yes.
have the number one pick? I think in
They
the
do.
draft.
I am so glad you brought this up. The Chicago Bears do have the number one pick in the NFL draft. Who cares about the Kansas City Chiefs now? It is Bears time now and forever. Let's hope they are able to get a myriad of picks for that number one pick. They just closed a deal on some property in Arlington Heights for potentially a new stadium. Things are coming up, Chicago Bears. So,
Yeah,
and
but
speaking of
that's
Bears,
just what I wanted to say about the Chicago franchise. That's all.
and
Oh, and correct me if I'm wrong though. Unlike Kevin Costner in Draft Day, they didn't have to trade up for the pick.
correct. They were just
They
bad.
they were
They were
just bad.
they were just bad. Exactly. Hey, but you got to start from the bottom. There's only up from here. And speaking
Exactly.
of bears, I've heard rumors that they might even actually bring in the cocaine bear to play for them.
A cocaine bear.
A
Interesting. Well, I
co-bear
mean, a cocaine. So, are there more than one cocaine bears?
with enough cocaine and enough bears there are.
That's very true. Well, if there's going to be that many cocaine bears, we better get the FBI involved. Speaking of which, the
It just so happens that cocaine, I believe, was at least the subject of at least one episode of FBI, possibly, perhaps, maybe, if I remember correctly.
I've
Sounds
never seen a
plausible.
single episode of FBI. John, you want to take this one as well?
Hey, John, tell us about FBI, FBI International, and FBI Most Wanted, which I just learned was a thing today. I knew there were
I
two of
didn't
them.
realize
There was a third. There was a third one.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. FBI International is the most recent one, coming out in 2021. It's probably the worst of the three. It's an FBI field office that's in Europe, and they investigate international cases, as the title says. But it's still again a shared universe where you'll have people they do their crossovers. They'll have characters that are in FBI original and then Most Wanted, and they do their crossovers. And it's like, hey, we know each other. Hey, we're helping each other. The main FBI one I think is the best one. It does have some Law and Order vets, including Alana De La Garza, who was an ADA in Law and Order, and Jeremy Sisto, who was a detective on Law and Order. They're very good. as well. And I really like Missy Peregrine in it, who was also in, I think it's Rookie Blue, I think, which was like a big time Canadian television cop show, I think.
But they have cops in Canada.
Allegedly,
Supposedly.
maybe, perhaps.
We'll ask Patrick, previous
Yeah,
guest, to see if
I
that's true.
cannot, I guess I'll have to, yeah, reel that back in. I can neither confirm nor deny they have actual real cops in Canada.
Yeah, so the only thing I knew about the FBI shows is that one of the franchises had Dylan McDermott, who's an attractive man, and the only reason
I
that I
agree with
watched
that. He is very attractive.
the
Yes,
only
he
reason I
did.
watched the
Yeah.
trailers or commercials for the show.
Yeah, he took over for Julian McMahon, who was Doctor Doom in
Hey, we're tying it
those
together.
Fantastic Four movies that, at least one of them, or maybe both of them, that came out.
Yeah, he was in both the. I don't want to say the originals because there was a really much older one, but like
Yeah.
Fantastic Four and then Rise of the Silver Surfer.
But I think what FBI Most Wanted does do well, I think Julian McMahon was really good in that series. Liked he was very like a calming sort of presence that brought to it, and did a really good job, I think, of leading that show until deciding that he wanted to move on. But I do think, yeah, the just FBI is probably the strongest of the three, just because it's your standard sort of cop drama show, but it does have some good cast of characters and interesting stories and some big time exciting incidents that they have to investigate.
So I'm going to throw a curveball here before we get into the final franchise that the three of us can speak intelligently on. I want to ask, because a lot of these are, I would say, are considered procedurals, especially like cop procedurals. So a question I want to pose to both of you is, what are things you liked and I'd say dislike about this really maybe overused television model with the cop procedural?
I don't know if you want to talk about this, John, but I will say that my favorite cop procedural show that I watch is The Closer and Major Crimes. And I think that a lot of that has to do with the creator, James Duff. And I think that what I like so much about those shows is that like they take character very seriously. And I feel like that's always like a positive, is that sometimes I feel like in cop shows, the characters are a little bit stock. They're a little like, you know exactly where they're going to start, where they're going to end in an episode. You kind of know exactly who does it in a lot of procedural shows. But what I like about The Closer particularly, but Major Crimes does this as well, very well, is that they inject a lot of comedy from every single character. I think at least every character has a laugh line, although some characters have more than others. And two, I feel like there's always some sort of story that is always happening throughout the season that makes me want to keep coming back and pick up the rest of the season if I catch an episode that's from the middle of it. So that's like my favorite procedural show. But I feel like stuff that focuses on character and season long arcs and makes itself into television that you can watch a full season of, but that you can also just case of the week easily. That's my kind of stuff.
Yeah, I will say I do very much enjoy crime fiction in general and like detective stories. So I do like a lot of Sherlock Holmes stuff, Raymond Chandler's his novels and that kind of thing. Just I like to like a hard boiled detective stories. But they do, and especially like procedural cop shows, they can be very formulaic. So yeah, you sort of know what's the structure, what everything's going to be. Where it's you have your crime, the misdirection, they go down the wrong sort of road, if you will, and then hey, now we'll get our guy. But then I do like some non-traditional, meaning probably I like Psych, love Psych, where it does have its serious moments and its humor, but also very, I think, very smart and very intelligent in how it handles each case and the interactions with the characters. So I do like the idea of, hey, let's just jump in for a week of a Law and Order and say, hey, there's a new story, a new crime, a new case that we got to go on, a new adventure, a new story. But also too, you need the strong characters that have good interactions with each other and good chemistry, and they really kind of want to get invested into, want to see more of, and see them keep going and working more.
Totally agree. One thing that I think is kind of necessary now, though, is for these procedurals to kind of adapt to the times. Police misconduct has been something that's been going a lot longer than the last handful of years. I think it's starting to get a much more critical eye, especially in our fiction media. And I think it becomes the staple of I'll say, a better procedural when it actually addresses those and doesn't overshadow, doesn't try to hide a lot of the issues that our society is dealing with, especially when it comes to the police. And while it might be unconventional, I'd look at something even like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Despite it being a half-hour comedy, I still think it has a lot of tropes of your cop procedural. And in its last season, it really had to make a shift after a lot of the news stories we've gotten about police, and I think it did it pretty well. Again, it's easy to say that as a white dude, recognizing the privilege that I have, but I'd like to think that as our producers, as our writers who are tasked with these procedurals are evolving, that they are recognizing how society is looking at police and law enforcement. And if they're not writing to keep up with those times, I think those shows are going to be not long for television.
Agreed.
That's a good point.
Let's talk about the finest Dick Wolf franchise that I think the three of us can agree upon, and that is the Law and Order franchise. I have a personal affinity for the original season or the original series, but this franchise has so many. There's Exiled, a Law and Order movie. There's Law and Order SVU, Special Victims Unit, Criminal Intent, Trial by Jury, which only lasted a season, Law and Order UK, Law and Order LA, Law and Order True Crime, Law and Order Organized Crime. Upcoming on Peacock is Law and Order Hate Crimes. Like, this is a well of television and content for Dick Wolf. But again, I think its wellspring really started from the original Law and Order franchise.
The original Law and Order, and I would also say SVU is the other like major one, and that's the one that I probably watch the most, just because it's on the most. But I love the original Law and Order and the cast of characters that it goes through.
Yeah, I think Jack and I and the three of us were talking about it before we started recording, just how on like sick days or days home, like you can put on WeTV and Law and Order is probably on, and it might be the same 7 episodes that you watched the day before, but you're still easy to sit down and watch and see what the cops and the DAs are up to on this case of the week.
It's probably the most digestible television on right now, I would say. Like, yes, it deals with heavy themes, but it makes it seem like those heavy things can all be wrapped up in a neat little bow in 42 minutes. And that just is comforting.
And to that point, it is things that are, quote, ripped from the headlines, though it's not using verbatim names or likeness. Like, it is taking modern stories and applying them into this fictitious world. John, what are your thoughts on Law and Order?
Very, very fun. Very, very enjoyable. Again, you'd mentioned how many Law and Order shows there are and have been. So there's one, everyone, like I wasn't a big on Criminal Intent, but I would still put it on because you would still have like Vincent D'Onofrio doing weird things with his hands. And then Jeff Goldblum was on it, which is like wild. And again, I think of all the actors that have been on a Law and Order, whether it's as a main detective or lawyer or ADA, or like Dennis Farina was one for a season, and it's like it kind of blows your mind even to just guest stars or on an episode. Like Robin Williams was a really messed up creepy villain in an episode. I think it was SVU.
It was SVU, yeah.
And it just kind of just blows your mind sometimes who shows up. You look through people's IMDb or acting credits, like, oh, this person was on an episode of Law and Order, and then 3 years later on SVU, oh, and they showed up again on Law and Order as someone else, and then back on like 5 different characters or just like a corpse or something, which is wild to me. But again, hey, you can any time of day you can just turn on, or it's like all day as SVU is on all day, or Law and Order is on all day kind of thing, and just turn it on and be like, oh, cool, I remember this episode, or oh, I haven't seen this episode.
Law and Order is also a great place for the theater nerds out there to watch for hours and hours and be like, oh, I recognize that theater actor from that show. Because so much of it films in New York, and Broadway actors on their Mondays will like come to Law and Order for a day and just film a bit part. Any person who has won a Tony has definitely been on Law and Order at some point in their life.
I will personally say that I like the stuff when it gets to the courtroom most, especially in the original, mostly because while I'm by no means a legal expert, it feels like a very accurate portrayal of how, at least as much as you can on a 45-minute drama, portray a court case, like the procedures, the law in question, the jury, all that stuff. I find very fascinating, and I think it's propped up by some pretty strong performances from the lead district attorneys.
Yeah, I will also say that I do also very much enjoy courtroom dramas. So I do agree. I
Me too.
love
Same.
just the legal aspects of just seeing lawyers in action, which I think most lawyers never really see the inside of a courtroom too. So it's kind of the idea of like, yeah, like if you could men when Tom Cruise is like, yeah, it's like I plea bargain like all these cases, when we're gonna set of steak knives. And so that's just the idea of seeing them in action. And then also too, I mean, some of these criminals who don't immediately lawyer up, like, dude, come on, what are you doing? Lawyer up immediately. Come on. This is a pet peeve of mine.
To wrap a little bow on this, I think one thing that's really great about Law and Order is kind of how it's permeated throughout other popular culture. Looking at The Office, there's the episode where Andy is in Sweeney Todd, a favorite of the podcast, and then we get to the scene where like we learned Michael had auditioned, and then we get to the scene of him monologuing the opening or the whole episode of Law and Order, which again is always funny to me. So just to see how Law and Order kind of permeates through that. And to, again, kind of tie in Jack's theater nerd comment and Sweeney Todd, which has been a conversation a couple times on the podcast.
I will also mention the season 3 episode of Community, wherein it is an entire Law and Order parody, down to the opening credits, where both Troy and Abe can't have the one line that leads right into the credits. It's if you want a perfect parody of a Law and Order episode, season 3, episode 16, Basic Lupine Urology. Excellent episode of television.
That sounds fantastic.
There is probably more we could say regarding Dick Wolf, or at least Law and Order. Like, we could probably have another 10-minute conversation about Ice-T, but I think it is time to
Why aren't we?
Still blows my mind that Ice-T.
We have to get into our fantastic castings here. For this episode, we're mixing it up again, and instead of each of us having a separate cast, we are going to be using the same cast list. Now, here is who we have collectively cast as Reed Richards, Sue Storm, Johnny Storm, and Ben Grimm. To kick things off, let's start off with the leader of the Fantastic Four, Reed Richards. Really, I don't think there's anyone else who could play Reed Richards other than probably the most prominent assistant district attorney in Law and Order history, and that's Sam Waterston. First and foremost, I love him in anything he's in, whether it's Law and Order as Jack McCoy, whether it's the crappy newsroom show on HBO that I admittedly love, or Grace and Frankie. I think he, despite his older age, has the length, like really just a tall guy, kind of lanky build. He also is very intelligent, and he also has this wit and kind of hidden rage that I think would make a good Reed Richards, and especially in this world that we are creating with our upcoming pitches. So that's why I think Sam Waterston would be a great Reed Richards. Anyone, either of you have any comments on choosing Sam Waterston as our Reed Richards?
No, it's a perfect choice.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, he's fantastic. I mean, it's still going to be going strong after all these years, back on Law and Order. I mean, yeah, there's no one else that could be our Reed Richards.
I was going to say, is there anyone who comes to mind who may have been in the running? Again, like we're solidly locked. I figured Ice-T might be Ben Grimm in the future, to be quite honest. He would have been someone we considered for Ben Grimm, but
maybe like a Chris Maloney would be the closest one that I could think of that could be a Reed, but wouldn't match it.
Anthony Anderson was another possibility, but even then, or Jesse L. Martin, honestly, would
be a
decent Richard.
Yeah,
but Sam Waterston is like top tier, absolutely.
Yeah. For the next two casts, I'm going to turn it over to our guest John Lestrina to discuss who we have picked for Sue Storm and Johnny Storm.
Okay, well, for Sue Storm, I feel there's only one choice. That is Olivia Benson herself, Mariska Hargitay. She's been looking at it since 1999. She has been on Law and Order Special Victims Unit. And so when I think of a Sue Storm, a leading lady, someone who, again, like a Sam Waterston, can be that main sort of draw to help lead a team, I think it's her. Again, I'm looking now to just to see how many episodes she's credited over 500 episodes for Law and Order SVU. And that's not counting crossover episodes of Law and Order of the other series that she's been on as well. So I think she just has this sort of, and his presence and has grown so much when you look at those early episodes of Law and Order SVU, where she's a little bit younger and just as a junior detective, to go now where she has been promoted for the last few years as captain. So she's leading the squad, and she's always been a very big proponent of all the victims and just really someone that people I think really look up to in that universe. And I just think there's no one better that could be a Sue Storm, to be a true hero, because she's legitimately a very big hero in this universe. So I think it's a perfect pick. Looking at other cast lists, I don't know who else I would say that would be close to be Sue Storm.
I mean, she's been nominated 8 times for her role as Olivia Benson, winning 1 Emmy Award. Like, she has the acting chops, and yeah, I think you covered it pretty well why she'd make a good Sue Storm, or a great Sue Storm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think she was the only person that could be the essentially the heart of the Fantastic, or I guess, there's arguments for that, but like in my mind, Sue has always been like the center of the Fantastic Four. And I think Mariska Hargitay is the perfect center.
What about Johnny Storm, John?
So for Johnny Storm, I think we decided to go with, or I know we decided to go with Melina Govich. And this was one that I was kind of going back and forth on who could be, and there's a number of options I think you'd go with. But when we're thinking of how I wanted to make a pitch and a dynamic, again, with a Ben Grimm, I want to think of somebody, at least at the time when they appeared on Law & Order, that it was sort of a younger, sort of a junior detective, that kind of role, that kind of person. And although Melina Govich was only really on like 1 season of Law and Order, but she's now, I think it's on one of the FBI shows, she's now an executive producer, or either at least directing some episodes, and either a co-executive producer or some sort of producer on FBI, whatever it is. But I just like the idea of a good dynamic between those two characters, the Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm. So I thought, you know what, let's go go a little outside. Maybe throw that slider or that splitter, that split fingered fastball, or maybe a curveball like Dan threw earlier. Just one of those. Again, always thinking in pairs and dynamics. So I like Melina Govich as well. Also, great on that one episode of Psych that she was on.
Yeah,
fire chief or a fire investigator. So I think I do want to see more Melina Govich. So let's give her the shot, I say, on this episode of the Fancast 4 podcast for Dick Wolf, not Wolf Blitzer.
Yeah, she hasn't acted in a while. She's been doing a lot of directing for the Chicago shows and for FBI. But it would be great to see her return to the screen, because she's fantastic on Law and Order.
Yeah, I agree. Once you had suggested this, I thought that was an inspired choice. The only person that I think ever really came to mind for me was Bobby Reyes. I believe he's on SVU. He was Mad Dog on Arrow. I know he was in some other
he's on Organized Crime.
Oh, sorry.
With
Thank you.
I think he just this
the
current season, with
Chris Maloney one.
Chris Maloney, yeah.
He plays a lot of kind of fiery, temperamental characters in other works that he's done. So I think he would have been another good choice. But I like the idea of having kind of 2 female Storm siblings, and I think Melina Govich fits very well. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jack to cast our last member of the Fantastic Four, Ben Grimm. Jack, who do you have for us?
So for our Ben Grimm, we are using a little bit of dark magic here, and we are resurrecting Jerry Orbach, be our Ben Grimm, Lumiere himself. As I said, one of my favorite things about Law and Order is watching it and seeing, oh, there's that person from theater that I know. And Jerry Orbach is the ultimate person from theater that I know on Law and Order. I'm expecting Ben Grimm to have at least 1 musical number, but we'll see what everyone else pitches. But I just think Jerry Orbach's such a good anchor on Law and Order, and he's got such a presence that like you notice him when he walks into the room. I feel like, and I think that that's exactly what you need from a Ben Grimm. So I think that he would be excellent in that role.
I mean, I feel like he plays Ben Grimm in Law and Order, just without, the powers.
That's true. That's kind of
Yeah.
true.
Like, I felt terrible. I was way too old when I realized that Jerry Orbach was Lumiere, and just the cognitive dissonance between his theater work, him putting Baby in a corner in Dirty Dancing, versus his work in Law and Order, just my mind was blown. So just to see the range this man has, certainly has the heart, the toughness, the intelligence to play Ben Grimm.
Yeah, he's the only person I immediately thought of.
All right. With our show cast, now it is time to pitch our Dick Wolf produced Fantastic Four TV show.
But before we get into those, I'm still going to ask our two normal questions to both of you. In your Dick Wolf produced Fantastic Four TV show, is their origin brought up at all?
No.
Okay.
No.
It's mentioned in mine, but it's not an important factor, and they've been the Fantastic Four for a while.
Yeah, no mention of their origin in my pitch as well. Secondly, does your show have anything to do with the MCU?
The MCU, no. Possibly the existing universe that I've already created, maybe.
Oh no! Oh no!
For better or for worse.
I forgot about this bit. I was so focused on the Mark Wahlberg bit that this one snuck up on me. Jack, what about you?
Well, because Mark Wahlberg has not been in any Law and Order, it does not take place in my MCU, but it does take place in the MCU.
Interesting. Mine does not take place in the MCU. I will say, in a way, the MCU is mentioned, but totally for a bit and not actually related to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So with that answered, John, as our guest, I'm going to turn it over to you to give our first Dick Wolf produced TV episode pitch.
Okay. A young couple exit a restaurant in New York City, a fine Italian restaurant named Antonio's. They have fair prices for the big city. Instead of immediately getting an Uber, they decide to enjoy the nice evening. As they walk down the street discussing why Sonic 2 is the greatest film released in all of cinematic history, she notices someone propped up against a trash receptacle. James, you should see if they're okay. What if they need help? We can get them a ride or something. Jane, this is New York. We have to be careful. Just wait right here. James slowly approached what appeared to be a young man, possibly passed out. Hey, buddy, are you okay? You need some help? He cautiously reached out to shake him. James jumped back and turned to Jane. Call 911 right now. Boom, and time goes by, and then it's now dark later at night. Later at night, Detective Ben Grimm exited the passenger side of his car. I can't believe I have stuff to work these night tours. I should be on a beach in Cancun drinking margaritas in the sun. Nope, here I am. And I know it's not a very good Jerry Orbach. In my mind, I hear him, but it's okay.
This is my favorite pitch of all time.
Since when do you drink margaritas? Junior Detective Johnny Storm, with an IE, exited the driver's side carrying 2 cups of coffee, the New York cups that they always have again in New York City. Just imagine those. I would love to see that, because again, Ben Grimm drinking margaritas, come on. And she held out one of the coffees to him. When in Rome, kid. Ben took the coffee from her and took a sip as he observed the scene. The area was marked off, and uniformed officers stood by, keeping crowds back, crime scene unit, taking photos, taking notes. And he says, hey, let's see what we got here. Hey, Thing, I thought you were dead, a familiar voice calls out. And it's Detective Ed Green, played by Jesse L. Martin. Again, this is Ed Green, just as his character, Jesse L. Martin's character in Law & Order, just as himself. They were partners. Would you knock it off? We just played cards last night. And come on, I'm not that old. Ben and Green were longtime partners until Ben became Rock-like. So I guess I do kind of, again, Ben became Rock in my story. I guess I forgot about that part. And then he was transferred to the elite squad known as the Fantastic Four. And then he turns to Johnny and says, hey, Johnny, could you warm this up a little bit for me? Coffee cooled a little too much for my taste. And again, now Johnny doesn't like this because Johnny has fire powers and does not like that. And so she forms like a fireball and says, how about I burn something instead? Ben's like, whoa, I'm good. And then turns back to his old partner, Ed, and says, hey, why are we here? This. And Detective Green holds up an evidence bag with some evidence in it. And Ben looks at it, and he has a smile on his face. And he says, we got the son of a bitch. And here we go. Intro the title card. Super awesome theme song is playing. We all love it. We all know it's great. It's awesome. We all love it. It's great. It's classic Law and Order style. Fantastic Four with a Fantastic Four theme, but very
Can
Law
it
and
be
Order.
a Law and Order style version of Gonna Be Fantastic?
Gonna be fantastic.
That
Gonna be
sounds that's definitely very
fantastic.
fantastic. And
Bow,
hey, I'm
bow,
all for
bow,
it.
bow, bow, bow.
Bam, 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 bam. All right, now this is the part of the episode where there's going to be some investigating. There's witnesses. They're doing the investigations. They're talking to people, and there's an autopsy report. And the medical examiner is Dr. Cecilia Reyes, played by Tamara Tooney from Law and Order SVU, the longtime medical examiner. She's great. And then now we're back at the precinct 2, and Ben and Johnny, they're going through all the evidence, this major evidence that we've already discussed in the interviews with witnesses. And then Thing says, I tell you what, this isn't nearly as bad as when Dom and his friends went wild through the city. All those cars. Glad I didn't have to clean that up. And then Johnny responds, okay, before you brag once again about Dominic Toretto owing you a favor, can we get back on this case? Johnny is a very young, angry detective, and she wants to just get the job done. And, her big sis wants results. If we can get Doom, we got him. His boy is going to flip on him easy. I can't wait to see the look on Doom's face. Oh boy, Dr. Doom? Is that who they're referring to? Maybe, possibly. Okay, and then Captain Sue Storm is in her office talking to Dr. Leonard Sampson, who is played, of course, by the wonderful J.K. Simmons, who was their psychiatrist from Law and Order. So they're talking. Sue Storm and Dr. Sampson are talking. Captain. Now, again, this is J.K. Simmons speaking, so imagine J.K. Simmons. Captain, I know you want to get this guy, but your obsession can be dangerous. You have to remember to take time for yourself. Let others help you. He won't stay out there much longer. His time will come. And of course, Sue Storm and Barry Mariska. It's guys like these that keep us going. And then Sue taps a folder on her desk and says, it's the job. You make sure it's just a job. Keep it at work. And the door knock on the door. Ben and Johnny come inside. Doc Sampson acknowledges them, takes his leave. He's got to go back to see other patients and everything else. And Ben just smiles and says, we got him, Captain. He's done. And then Sue looks down at her desk and opens a file, staring down at a photo of Pedro Pascal playing Galactus. She says, we got Galactus? No, sis. We got Doom. And holds up the evidence bag. Sue, turning away from her obsession with Galactus, closes the file and says, hey, Doom wouldn't be this so sloppy. And then Ben says, he had the wrong guy. He's going to flip. And she says, hey, Sue says, all right, I'll call Reed. Go change scenes. Back into the office of the district attorney, where Reed is sipping on scotch and Sue perusing his files on Dominic Toretto. And again, this just remind you if you haven't caught on yet, this is the same universe of the Muppets and the Justin Lin one. So everyone went to Fantastic Square. It's all building a universe. Okay, it's all in the same universe. And then Sue comes in and Reed. So Sue, have you heard from your pal Dominic lately? Referring to Dominic Toretto. She responds, Reed, you know what Mr. Nobody said. I know, Sue. We're here to talk Dr. Doom. What do you got? And so now they go over all the evidence. The witnesses going to testify, and Reed's very happy. And then he says, hey, Victor was never Galactus. He always wanted to be. And this could be the path to get Galactus. And Sue says, hey, we're going to get Galactus. Maybe not this time, but we'll get him. And all right, I'll get the warrant. Send your detectives to arrest Doom. And then we go to Victor Von Doom, played by Dylan McDermott, who was a villain on Law and Order Organized Crime and also now on FBI Most Wanted. And some say he's very attractive looking. He's a good looking guy. Definitely good.
So, some would say that.
Yes, some. Yes, here, some.
All right, so Victor Von Doom is enjoying a nice family dinner at their favorite Chinese spot. There with his wife and 2 children. wife played by a 1993 Law and Order guest star, wonderful actress Juliana Margulies, and then their two kids. They're just whatever child actors. Who cares? They don't matter. All right, and then Doom showing nameless children how to use chopsticks when some uniformed officers and Detective Grimm and Storm approach. Sorry for the disturbance, Mrs. Doom, as Victor is handcuffed. This will only take a moment. When Johnny reads him his rights, and Doom says, hey, tells him to his wife to call his attorney, and says, you are making a huge mistake. And then Ben responds, again, a very Lenny Briscoe, I think, line where he says, hey, try another fortune cookie. It's clobbering time. And then Doom's kids say, he said the thing. It's a funny joke. And then Johnny quietly laughs and just, it's like, really? And oh yeah, because he said it was clobbering time. And then Ben's like, yeah, I got an image to maintain. People know him. They want him to say the thing. So he said the thing. And then we go now, fast forward to an interrogation room. Doom is sitting with his lawyer, Janice Lincoln, played by Tova Belja, who was a defense attorney, and now then became a judge on, I believe mostly Law and Order SVU, if I'm not mistaken. And then he has Doom's got his dampening powered handcuffs on, and they have all the evidence going, and then say, hey, and well, you got nothing on me. I'm going home soon. I'm suing this department. I'm suing this city. And his lawyer, hey, Victor, take it easy. And said, hey, Reed, what are we doing here? You embarrassed my client in front of his family. This is a political stunt. We're trying to run for mayor, governor. We're leaving. And Reed says, the only place your client is going is prison. Is that a threat from Mr. Fantastic? Be quiet, Victor. Okay, Reed Richards, humor me. That's what they're saying. Hey, and then they laid out all the charges, show everything. And then Victor, all I can do is laugh. That's quite the story, counselor. Very riveting. Okay, and then, hey, you know what? Congratulations, counselor. You have a joke of a case. Circumstantial. Nothing to link some street punk to my client. We're leaving. And then Janice and Victor attempt to leave, and it was also on Boardwalk Empire. But then Sue holds up this damning evidence. The evidence that we've mentioned before that is going to seal Victor Von Doom. And she says, you're done. And then Reed gets up and says, I hope you enjoy Rikers. And then Victor looks at his attorney and stuns silent. Do something, Janice. And Janice says, well, what are you offering? Life. And then Doom says, whoa. I can get you Galactus. Sue looks to Reed and says, Reed, maybe we should hear him out. And then Reed says, if what he's got is good, maybe I can get him out before he wears diapers. Maybe. And then Doom laughs and says, oh, I got what you want. And then it says, to be continued until maybe next time.
Oh, there'll be a next time.
I sense a crossover potential here.
Absolutely.
Maybe.
I mean, outside of the times you've said it was a crossover, but
yeah. the crossover between John's previous pitches.
Somehow the Dick Wolf Muppets Fast franchise crossover that we didn't know we wanted, but now we need.
Will
Sam Waterston be awkwardly CG'd into a shot with Vin Diesel?
Possibly. You know, again, first and foremost, I'm in the business of making money.
Of course.
Naturally.
So, you know, sometimes schedules don't line up.
We'll make it work, you know.
We'll make it work.
Well, thank you, John. That was a riveting episode pitch. Jack, you have a lot to live up to.
All right, here we go. We start with a crowd exiting Rogers the Musical. In this crowd are M'Baku and Okoye, Winston Duke and Denai Guerrero, who have both made appearances on Law and Order. They're going about talking about the inaccuracies of the musical when suddenly they come across, much like in John's pitch, a dead body, because that's how every Law and Order episode starts. Random people coming across a victim. Turns out this victim is Willie Lumpkin, who is a mailman for the Fantastic Four. Immediately, this case is personal for these detectives that are brought in on this. They initially ask Okoye and M'Baku for help, but they have no jurisdiction in America. They're Wakandans. That means it's left in the hands of the Fantastic Four, and that's where we get our opening credits. We then cut to Reed and Ben are presented with the evidence of Willie's death. It had happened about an hour into the musical. Probably somebody who had been in the show, because there was an empty drink cup next to him. So you're telling me some drunk guy stabbed him? Ben says, throwing his papers aside. We think it was motivated, says Reed. Have you seen the mailbag yet, Ben? The mailbag? Let's go over to forensics. Over in forensics is where Johnny is. And Johnny tells them that one of the items contained in Willie's mailbag was a letter addressed to the Fantastic Four, particularly to Sue. She opens it up and sees that it's pictures. Who took these? Sue asks. See in the bottom. JJ. We cut to an interrogation room where Kristen Ritter, Jessica Jones, sits. There's a conversation between her and Reed and Ben, wherein she basically tells them, yeah, I had a higher job to stalk Sue. And when I found out that the evidence would be getting to her, I was told to handle the situation, but I didn't have anything to do with this. How we're supposed to believe you? As she produces an alibi, which is she was not at Rogers the Musical that evening. She says, I know someone who was, though. You might want to talk to him. We then get to Luke Cage, who has also appeared in Law and Order, who was indeed at Rogers the Musical. You know, evidence seems to be building up against him. This is where we reach our midpoint, where we think we figured out who the person who killed Willie was. And it's supposedly Luke Cage. At this point, we're going to start to move into the courtroom side of it, where our district attorney, who is Sue Storm, is presenting her case. However, she realizes about halfway through this case that Luke Cage may have committed the murder, but he was not the person who was behind it. I think about who would have had the motivation against Sue, who would have motivation against a lawyer like this. Maybe somebody who put Sue away years and years ago. Sue goes back and looks through all of her cases that she had gone through, finds her first case, wherein she convicted a now free Justin Hammer, played by Sam Rockwell. Justin Hammer is then called in to testify in court. He does his Justin Hammer thing where he tries to play it off the way he did in Iron Man 2. But Sue eventually entraps him in his lies. Justin Hammer confesses to setting up Luke Cage to murder Willie. Luke is imprisoned for 6 months. Justin Hammer goes back to prison for life. And the Fantastic Four sit around thinking that they have gone through what they needed to go through when they get a call. It's the prison. Luke Cage has escaped. And Justin Hammer's dead. That's our ending.
Hell yeah. Very solid.
Off the cuff.
Totally.
But like,
I could see that in the MCU too. Totally. I like your tie-in of all like the kind of Netflix, some of those Netflix show.
I figure we get the
heroes.
TV universe into the TV show.
Right. And you might see a similar line of thinking with my pitch.
As someone who enjoys Sam Rockwell and Justin Hammer being the best part of Iron Man 2, I am all for more Justin Hammer and Sam Rockwell.
The only real good
Absolutely.
thing about Iron Man 2.
I wish I could have been able to include Mickey Rourke, even though he's not been in Law and Order. Have you seen his thing where he says that Law and Order SVU is better storytelling than the MCU?
I haven't, but I will after
it's
this episode.
Amazing. You should read it. He's 100% correct somehow.
Hey, everyone has a win from time to time. But I am very interested in listening to this. Before I can listen to it, I do have to give my pitch. Everyone, I want you to get in the correct mindset here. Imagine you're sitting on your couch. It's a Saturday afternoon. You are flipping through the channels on your cable TV because cable still exists, apparently. And you flip on WeTV, which is now a subsidiary of Disney. And you see, when you hit the guide button, it's Law and Order MCU. It's season 1, episode 4. Crime and Punisher. And you're like, oh, great, it's about to start. Cool. In the criminal justice system, the people, both super and empowered, are represented by two separate yet equally important groups: the super detectives who investigate crime and the super attorneys who prosecute the offenders. These are their stories. Get into the theme music as mentioned previously. The show opens on a couple walking their dog near a warehouse district in New York City. Why they are walking their dog? That is not clear. well, at least in this area. I mean, I know why you walk your dog, but why they're walking near the warehouse is irrelevant. However, as they turn a corner, they're confronted by a stranger holding a gun. After the initial shock, they hear, "Sir, ma'am, please turn around and head home. It could get dangerous." The camera shifts perspectives to a police raid on one of the warehouses. It is alluded to be a bust of an illegal super soldier serum ring. As the enhanced SWAT team busts in, yelling and letting off a flashbang and smoke bomb, no yelling or gunfire is returned. As the smoke clears, it is realized that all of the presumed criminals are dead, killed by various means of gunfire, knife wounds, and explosives. After a minor time jump, we see two super detectives casing the scene, Ben Grimm and Johnny, i.e. Storm. As they search the warehouse, they each find ways to throw in their catchphrases, like Ben saying, "Oh man, these guys got clobbered," and Johnny, "With all the fumes in here, you certainly don't want to leave a flame on," and Ben's like, "Hey, leave the one-liners to me." As they conclude their search, they find the remains of a business card with only a white skull on it. After canvassing the neighborhood, they are led to the bar with no doors. And like many Law & Order episodes, the bartender remembers everything that has happened and everyone who has ever been in their bar ever. He identifies the card to be a tattoo parlor that caters specifically to the anti-hero types. When Ben and Johnny leave and find the parlor, they start asking questions to one of the artists working on a tally mark tattoo for a customer. However, as Ben and Johnny start asking questions, the artist bolts out the back door. After a dramatic super chase, Ben and Johnny catch the guy and bring him in for questioning. After some intense interrogation, they cannot get any info out of him, and they have to let him go. Johnny eventually takes things into his own hands and reaches out to a contact of his, Felicia Hardy, who goes by the alias Black Cat, who's played by Angie Harmon of Law & Order fame as one of the assistant district attorneys, who he has hack into the shop's computer and steal the shop's client ledger. Ben and Johnny are eventually led to an apartment of a man named Frank Castle. After executing a search, they find a secret room with a cache of weapons, but no signs of Frank. Ben is not convinced. On his instinct, he takes a look in one more spot and finds another secret compartment. When he opens the hatch, Frank, played by Christopher Maloney, jumps out, but Ben easily subdues him. We now move to the courtroom. At the arraignment, Matt Murdock, played by Dylan McDermott, who, while not a Dick Wolf show, was a defense attorney in The Practice, says that the defendant, Frank, pleads not guilty. Once the case moves to trial, Murdock files a motion with the judge, Jen Walters, played by Catherine Mannheim, to suppress the client ledger and ultimately dismiss the case. After learning how the evidence was obtained, she rules that the rest of the evidence was tainted due to fruit of the poisonous tree and has no choice but to side with the defense and dismiss the case. This forces Assistant District Attorneys Reed Richards and Sue Storm, who are part of a special super person division of the DA's office, to have to do their own investigation. They eventually are able to find their own witnesses that saw Frank head to the warehouse with his van and cache of weapons. Reed and Sue have to place these witnesses in super witness protection due to threats on their life. The information provided by this witness allows what was found in the apartment to be readmitted as evidence. Matt Murdock has to change strategies and attempts to use a strategy of nullifying the jury. He even says in conversation with Reed that Frank's story is the ultimate nullifier, with Reed responding, "Jury nullification is not legal, Murdock." During the defense's examination of their witnesses, they bring out a multitude of character witnesses that recount Frank's time in the military. J.K. Simmons returns as J. Jonah Jameson, but this time as a psychologist sent to examine and give testimony on his assessment of Frank. And then with the final witness, they retell how his family was brutally murdered. Sue notices that this has a major impact on the jury and tells Reed he needs to have a hell of a closing if they're going to win the case. Matt Murdock closes first, recounting all of the testimony and then giving an impassioned plea that people like Frank would not be necessary if the police did their job correctly, but since they can't, we need Frank. When it's Reed's turn to close, he gives an impassioned plea that the role of heroes are not to take people's lives into their hands. Despite living in a world of super people and gods, we cannot allow extrajudicial executions, even in the name of justice. As they wait for the jury to finish deliberating, Reed and Sue discuss further the role of heroes, police, and the DAs in today's world. Once the jury returns, there is a dramatic pause when the foreman finally says, "We can't come to a decision. It's a hung jury." Matt Murdock smiles. Reed hangs his head. But Sue lifts his chin and says, "We just have more work to do." The screen goes black and then reads, "Executive Producer Dick Wolf."
Yeah. All right. That was good. That was very good, Dan.
Thank you.
Law and Order is a great title.
Thank you.
Excellent pun.
Yeah, this was written in a day. mostly because, excuse me while I get on my soapbox a little bit. So we are recording on a Wednesday, and a couple days ago, there was another mass shooting at Michigan State University. While I didn't know him well, one of the victims was a client of mine and a member of my fraternity. And it shouldn't take someone even tangentially close to you for you to care about this issue. It's how many times can we say enough is enough when it comes to gun violence in this country? I know this, you don't come here to listen to stuff like this, but I've been tired of it for a long time. You can only call your senators, right? Do what you can, donate to causes, but I truly believe that no citizen in this country needs an assault rifle. We have too much access to it. There's not enough mental health protections or access in this country for those who need it. And it all just kind of piles on into events like this that are happening more than once a day now. While it was inspiration for this pitch, it's something that makes me sick to my stomach that it's still an issue today. And yeah, it sucks.
The fact that it may be easier for someone to get a gun than a therapist is kind of disgusting and something that needs to absolutely change in this country, because that's like inexcusable. No, there's no reason for anyone to have or own an assault rifle at all.
So, I don't want to put such a damper on an episode that I've had a lot of fun doing, but this last week has been tough. And again, I only slightly knew one of the victims. I can't imagine the people who have directly been impacted, friends, loved ones, fraternity brothers, anyone who actually knew intimately these people who have been killed in these acts of gun violence. It shouldn't be what we're about as a society. So, I'll get off my soapbox and conclude the episode. I would have felt bad if I didn't say something. With that said, we've gone through our castings and our pitches for a Dick Wolf produced Fantastic Four show. In the end, I do hope you, the listeners, enjoyed this exploration into this what if scenario and didn't mind my little monologue there at the end. I want to make a special note that the Fancast at 4 podcast is hosted for free on Anchor, and we encourage you, if you have your own podcast idea, to check it out. It is really a great resource for getting your idea off the ground. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Additionally, you can also find the Fancast at 4 podcast on Good Pods. Good Pods is a site similar to Goodreads, but for podcasts. You can search, listen, and review your favorite new podcasts thanks to this great resource. Again, you should check out Good Pods and look up the Fancast at 4 podcast.
If you are listening on YouTube, we would greatly appreciate you hitting the subscribe button and commenting with who your Dick Wolf cast would be, on what you thought of our lists and pitches, and on which creative you would like to see next.
Though we did not feature their music in the intro, I do want to thank Matt Hart and Maddie Gunner for their fantastic theme music they created for us, and I certainly want to thank you, John, for being our guest today. I hope you had fun again. Please tell our listeners where else they can find you.
Well, yes, I did have fun. What we've been talking about doing and having fun and joking, and then really thinking about, oh wait, are we actually gonna do this? And like, yeah, we'll do it. So again, very fun. So thank you two for having me. But yes, you can find me on, I believe it's called Twitter, if that's still a thing.
For now, it
We'll
is.
see.
At my name, JON_LASTRINA. If you like Fast and Furious, which you should, because there is a new one coming out this year, Fast X. It looks fucking awesome.
It looks so good.
And it's going to be like 7 hours long.
Yeah,
and
it's directed by the guy who directed the first Now You See Me. It can't not be good.
It'd be amazing. Also, too, if you like The Last of Us, both in video game form and now on television form, I tweet about that now. Other video game stuff, and as well, you can see me popping up on the Montyverse over on YouTube.com/the Montyverse with Monty and sometimes Dan and sometimes Jack and other people that are also involved in the Montyverse, doing Montyverse things, and maybe here again for Wolf Blitzer someday.
One of these days we'll read our Wolf Blitzer pitches. I promise I had a great one. I had to come up with this Dick Wolf one on the fly.
I appreciate you all.
So good. There was so much news reading mine. It was great.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you both being flexible and on the fly with adjusting your pitches. But that is our show. Thank you all so much for listening. I'm Dan Bettenhausen.
I'm Jack Mayer.
And on behalf of our guest, John Lestrina, we hope you all stay fantastic.